The upcoming election is going to determine the direction this country takes and whether it survives and resembles anything like the country that you and I grew up in. We're going to talk about the attack on the McCloskeys and our Second Amendment rights. And we're going to expand on the video I did where I defended the police. And we'll touch on some other stories that highlight just how bad things have gotten for our culture. And I'm actually going to do something that I have rarely ever done, and I'm going to defend Kanye West. We'll get into all of that and more. I'm Big E, and this is the Liberty Cast. The war continues, my friends. The McCloskeys have been charged with unlawful use of a firearm while cities and states all over the country are moving forward with plans to defund or totally disband the police. It is imperative that conservatives step up, and show out between now and November because the left's plans, should they gain power, will destroy this country, starting with your Second Amendment rights. And there's an outright hostility right now towards this country and its symbols. And I'm not just referring to the NFL supporting the open disrespect of our flag. The NBA and Major League Baseball have bent the knee as well. And people are blaming Kanye West's mental health issues for some of the things that he said during a political rally, even though he made as much sense and spoke as much truth as he ever has. There's a lot I want to get to, so let's do it. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the McCloskeys have been charged with unlawful use of a firearm, exhibiting, which according to Missouri state law, a person commits the offense of unlawful use of weapons if he or she knowingly exhibits, when they in the presence of one or more persons, any weapon readily capable of lethal use in an angry or threatening manner unless acting in self-defense, which, if an angry mob breaks down your fence to get onto your private property, threatens to kill you, burn down your home, kill your dog, I submit that qualifies as self-defense. Only in this bizarro world of woke leftism does that warrant criminal charges. But there's a twist. As it turns out, the pistol that Patricia McCloskey was wielding in that encounter was not readily capable of lethal use. It had been used as a prop in a court case and had been rendered inoperable. The Assistant Circuit Attorney, Chris Hinckley, ordered the crime lab to take it apart, and I imagine they went to test fire it and found that it wouldn't. So it was not readily capable of lethal use, which means that she should not be charged with the felony unlawful use of weapons. This is an excerpt of the report filed by the crime lab. The firearm could not be fired as submitted. At the request of ACA Chris Hinckley, the firearm was field stripped and found to have been assembled incorrectly. The firing pin spring was placed in front of the firing pin, which was backwards and will not fire in this condition. The firearm was reassembled properly, test fired, and functioned as designed. No additional defects were observed. Now, the governor of Missouri promised to intervene on the McCloskeys' behalf, saying that he will pardon them if it came to that. And the AG, Attorney General Eric Schmidt, filed a brief citing the Castle Doctrine law, asking that the charges be dismissed. Now, Kim Gardner is one of the Soros-backed district attorneys and is not likely to drop these charges. The Second Amendment was included in the Bill of Rights to ensure that people had the ability to stand up against a tyrannical government. Anti-Constitution zealots that say that something like that could never happen. But it's happening right now in St. Louis. It's happening in New York and California and the places where owning a gun is viewed worse than many crimes. Now, I've mentioned before how I was told once that if someone breaks into your home and if it's your time, it's your time. Well, this is that mentality backed up by the power of the government. Do you think she would be charging anyone associated with Black Lives Matter if this had turned out differently and the McCloskeys had ended up hurt or killed? Nah, I don't think so. And this is why the upcoming election is so important. It's important for our Second Amendment rights, and not just our Second Amendment rights, all of our rights. Every election you hear people say that this election is the most important one of our lifetime. And frankly, every 4 years, that statement's true. This time around, though, I think it takes on a much more ominous tone. If you've been paying attention over the past 4 years, the Democrat Party has careened so far to the left that they are more of a threat to our way of life than they have ever been.
So let me be as clear as I can about this. When Democrats next have power, we should be bold. And that means when the Democrats have the White House again, if Mitch McConnell tries to do what he did to President Obama, then we should get rid of the filibuster.
I am pleased to join my colleague, the leader Hoyer, and Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, as we prepare to fight an historic injustice by passing legislation to finally grant the District of Columbia statehood.
By getting rid of the filibuster and giving D.C. statehood, they will have a permanent majority and would be able to ram through any crap piece of legislation they want. They've told us what they want. They told us what they want to do. And if they get a majority in both chambers and win the presidency, you can kiss your Second Amendment and pretty much every other right we enjoy goodbye. But in terms of the Second Amendment, let's take a look at perhaps the most consequential piece of legislation that is out there right now, authored by the illustrious Hank Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the American people are relieved that Congress is finally going to do something about one of the most pressing issues of the day. That is, we've got to ensure access to helium for all. I'm pleased to support this bill, which shows that this Tea Party Congress will make the tough choice to keep children's birthday parties on schedule and give industries that rely on helium the lift that they deserve. How can we make sure that the injustice of there being no helium for comedians to get that high-pitched voice that we all hold near and dear to our hearts? Imagine a world without balloons.
My fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize.
Yeah, that guy. And he's a lawyer. Now, we've talked about this before, but it was something that we can't lose sight of despite all of the Chinese coronavirus madness. H.R. 5717 and Pocahontas' version S3254, these bills are amalgamations of every gun control wish list item they could ever hope to get passed. Here are some of the provisions in this bill. It creates a national gun registry, bans semi-automatic rifles and standard capacity magazines, implements red flag gun confiscation laws on a national level, imposes a tax on guns of 30% and ammo at 50%. And that's on top of whatever you deal with in your state. Raises the age to purchase a firearm to 21, preventing people who are able to fight and die for this country from exercising their Second Amendment rights. Ridiculous. It makes it illegal to purchase more than one firearm in a 30-day period. Bans unfinished lowers so you can't build your own unserialized, or as they call them, ghost guns. It bans suppressors, and it forces FFLs to spend massive, ridiculous amounts of money to comply with new security requirements. So basically, if you're not Walmart or Dick's or Academy, you won't be able to comply with these security requirements. It repeals the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, the PLCAA, so that whenever someone uses a firearm illegally, or even legally, the family of the victim or the perpetrator, if the person is shot by an armed citizen in self-defense, can sue the manufacturer. It requires you to obtain a license to buy guns and ammo. And in order to get the license, you need to complete a live fire exercise. Now, how is a first-time buyer going to obtain a gun to use? You can't buy one until you get the license. And if you can't buy one, if you can't obtain one, you can't get the license. So as this bill is currently written, it will effectively wipe out gun ownership in a generation. Again, this is why this election in November is as consequential an election as has ever been. Can you not see what's at play here? They have already made it more dangerous to live in this country. Bail reform, letting murderers and child molesters out of jail because they might catch a virus. But now they've signaled that protecting yourself against such animals could land you in jail. It's that fundamental transformation that they've been aiming at for a while now. But it doesn't end there. It's permeating all aspects of our culture. They're coming for your guns, despite their previous protestations to the contrary. They're coming for your flag, burning it, stomping on it, kneeling on it, saying that it's a symbol of division rather than unity. And now it's not just the NFL kneeling during the national anthem, but Major League Baseball is getting into the mix. And we'll get into that right after this break. This is disgusting. Now, some people might think I'm putting too much emphasis on it, but obviously, I disagree. Now, the Nationals are my favorite Major League Baseball team. And the fact that everyone on the field did this at the Nationals-Yankees game, and everyone on the Dodgers and the Giants kneeled as well, except one player. One player didn't kneel, and we'll touch on that in a second. But I'm going to speculate that this was coordinated and likely came down from the Major League Baseball front office. Now, if this madness continues, Major League Baseball is going to be another sport that gets crossed off the list. Now, this is America's pastime. How are they going to let something like this happen? Well, I have a theory. I have a couple, actually. And the left has been downplaying how special it is to be American for a long time, and they hit full stride during the Obama era.
Could I ask you whether you subscribe, as many of your predecessors have, to the school of American exceptionalism that sees America as uniquely qualified to lead the world?
I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism.
So why would anyone want to participate in a sport so closely associated with a not so special country? And I know that sounds crazy, but remember when it was crazy that a child molester or a murderer would get out of jail because they might catch a virus? Or a business owner would get thrown in jail for opening up so that they can feed their families and their employees can feed their families? So how crazy is it really to think that the left's assault on American exceptionalism could have the unintended consequence of fewer Americans playing baseball? Youth baseball participation was for a long time on the decline. They've seen an uptick, a slight uptick in the past 2 or 3 years. But for a long time, that was the case. Emphasis has been put on football and basketball, and to a lesser extent, soccer. With the rise in popularity of travel teams for these sports, kids have to specialize earlier than they did before. And families in poorer districts, it's just too expensive for them to have their kids participate in baseball. And as a result of that, parents lose interest. And there's a whole lot more to it, and it's not really worth discussing further in this context. But parents losing interest was evident in the declining attendance numbers at Major League Baseball games even before the virus hit. And I have a feeling that they're going to be disappointed in their attendance numbers when, or should I say, if we are finally ever able to go to games. Those numbers are probably not going to bounce back to pre-virus numbers, and they definitely won't go up. So between the expense of going to a game and then being subjected to the disrespect shown the country at the start of games, I think a lot fewer people are going to be on board with that than they realize. I mean, think about it. The beta male feminists wearing pussy hats aren't going to go to games. Antifa thugs aren't going to games because they're in their mother's basement and can't afford it. And based on what I've seen of them on video, very few of them are athletes or former athletes who ever had any interest in sports. Now, earlier I mentioned a player who refused to kneel. He's a relief pitcher on the Giants by the name of Sam Coonrod. He said that he's a Christian and he can't get with Black Lives Matter. Good for you, sir. He'll be one of my favorite players if I continue to watch Major League Baseball. Now, let me shift gears from sports here for a second. I said in the beginning that the transformation the left is seeking has permeated all aspects of our culture. And that's because the left controls most aspects of the culture: academia, government, entertainment. But law enforcement still has a strong conservative presence. And the leftists just simply cannot have that, can they? Now, I did a video about defending and defunding the police last week, and I just want to expand on that a bit. The police are not the problem in this country, despite the narrative that they are. The few crooked cops that wear the badge to exert power over people or who use it to enrich themselves make up a minuscule portion of the police as a whole. They're already doing more with less. You hear about cops all the time who go above and beyond. They use their own money to pay for groceries for someone who was shoplifting when they would have been well within their rights to arrest them. or putting together fundraisers to help people pay their rent or to help them buy a car so they can get to work. These are the cops that we must defend. Could cops use better training? Of course. Let's get them better defensive tactics training. Teach them some basic grappling or jujitsu. Those things require more funding, not less. But isn't it strange how until now the left never met a problem they didn't think they could solve by throwing some money at it? Except, apparently, when it comes to keeping citizens safe. When it comes to that, they get fiscally conservative real quick. Defend, not defund the police. Back the blue. Now, there's more evidence that this nonsense is affecting our culture. Check out this study by the Cato Institute. This study shows that 62% of Americans are afraid to express their political beliefs for fear that some might find them offensive. They asked a representative sample of 2,000 people whether they believe that the current political climate prevented them from expressing their beliefs because others might find it offensive. I believe it. I absolutely believe it. The political climate has changed since Obama's presidency, but it took an even more dramatic turn when President Trump was elected. And I see it online all the time. I just saw it in an interaction I had online the other day on social media. It wasn't directed at me, amazingly enough, but someone on our side got particularly nasty with a woman we were disagreeing with. And I called him out for it. But it just speaks to a climate that now finds that kind of discourse acceptable. And, or at the very least, a lot of people no longer think that it might be a bit out of bounds. Now, name calling and cursing someone out has no place in political discourse. I always try to be as amiable as possible because someone who may not be politically aligned yet or is feeling their way out and leaning one way or another, they'll see that and get pushed in another direction because they think that that's the way most conservatives think. Now, we're not going to change most people's minds if they've been set in their ways, but that person who's watching could be persuaded if you have good arguments and present them without demeaning the other person. Anyway, I got off on a tangent, so let's get back to this study. Some of the other points in this study show that 50% of liberals, and that's Cato's word, they're leftists based on the results, support firing Trump donors. And I was very disappointed to see that 36% of conservatives support firing Biden donors. And 32% of Americans are worried that their political views could harm their employment if their political views became known. Now, I can attest to that. I don't put any of the work that I do here at the Liberty Cast on certain sites because I've used them in my tech career. And since the Liberty Cast doesn't support my family just yet, I need my tech career and don't want to alienate any potential employers or supervisors or whatever. And I found that here in Texas, though, that's not a huge concern, but you never know. You never know with all the people coming here from California. Now, I found that this particularly interesting. 40% of Republicans with college degrees and 60% with post-grad degrees are worried that their beliefs could harm them at work. Now, you know why that is, don't you? It's because they've seen their leftist professors dock their grades throughout their time in school and know that they're likely to encounter leftists like this in charge of some of the companies where they might end up working. They know this from experience that it could happen. Crazy, right? All right, let's take a break, and when we get back, we'll get into some pop culture stuff that actually has relevance and is something that we should all take note of. And then we'll get you out of here with some with some beta male hilarity. I'm going to do something that I rarely have had occasion to do, but recent years has seen me do this more often than I ever have, which is to say, this is maybe the second, possibly third time. I'm going to defend Kanye West. First, take a look at this clip.
The freedom does not come from an election. The freedom comes from you not loading up pornography. The freedom comes from you not taking the Percocet. The freedom comes from you not downing your brother and your sister. The freedom comes from you putting that gun down and not shooting people at the gas station. It has nothing to do with this election. So even if my wife were to divorce me after this speech, she brought North into the world, even when I didn't want to. She stood up and she protected that child. You know who else protected the child? My mom saved my life. My dad wanted to abort me. My mom saved my life. There would have been no Kanye West because my dad was too busy.
Now, if that had been some random candidate, and I don't even really think he's a candidate, he's only on the ballot in Oklahoma, and his petition to get on the ballot in Illinois has really not been processed. They still have to validate the signatures, make sure he turned in enough to appear on the ballot there. So we'll give him 2. Anyway, if he had been some random guy saying this, would anyone question their mental health status? Of course not. He talked about freedom and how it doesn't come from politicians or porn or shooting people or drugs or even this election. He broke down when he talked about how he and his wife came close to aborting their child and how his father wanted to abort him, but his mother prevented it. Now, there were points during this rally that were tough to watch. He's not a politician, and despite his Christian faith and his conservative leanings, he still has some leftist views and some wacky ideas. But I think that a lot of that just comes from being politically naive, not being educated on how a lot of things work, and just going off of what he's been told over the years, or what he believes to be true with little to no evidence. But none of that is indicative of an issue with his mental health, at least in this instance. Obviously, his mental health struggles are well documented. But this event has caused his peers to openly question his mental state. Now, what do you think the chances are that if he had held this rally but has been a vocal leftist over the past few years and had been meeting with Joe Biden, they'd be raising these concerns? I doubt it. I doubt they would have anything to say. Now, I was going to have some harsh words for his wife Kim when I saw her statement about his mental health issues, thinking that it was in response to the rally. As it turns out, in a series of tweets after the rally, he accused her of having or attempting to have an affair with the rapper Meek Mill, I think his name is. So in light of that, I'm just going to say that I wish them both well. Kanye gets the help he needs, and their family comes out of this okay. All right, one last quick thing before we get you out of here. And we're going to go back to the police for a second. A number of proposals for defunding the police call for sending civilians to certain situations, social workers for domestic violence and EDP calls. If you're a police officer, you've dealt with domestic violence calls, you know You know those are some of the most dangerous calls you could respond to. Sending a civilian to a domestic is asking for people to get hurt, and is one of the dumbest things I think I've heard. Until I heard Keith Ellison, former DNC chair and current Minnesota Attorney General, propose this the other day.
If you're a woman who's been a victim of a sexual assault and the assailant is ran away, wouldn't you rather talk to somebody who is trained in helping you deal with what you're dealing with, as opposed to somebody whose main training is that they know how to use a firearm?
This has to be one of the dumbest things, the most ridiculous things I've heard. Rape doesn't get reported often enough as it is, so when it does get reported, you need a police officer to take the report and start the investigation. Send a female officer or a female detective in plain clothes to help set the victim at ease as much as is possible after a horrific ordeal like rape. But there's also another reason why, and this may sound insensitive, but it has to be said. You need an officer or detective to respond so that they can get a sense of whether or not the accusation has merit. That's sad to say, and despite the Believe All Women campaign, false rape accusations are a thing. They've ruined the lives of many innocent men. So an officer on hand may see or hear something that indicates that the victim may not be totally forthright. But that aside, you need a police officer to respond to these calls so that they can get the investigation started and get whatever details might be fresh in the victim's mind. And if that's not possible, and sometimes it might not be, they can at least attempt to establish some kind of rapport or relationship so that when the victim is ready, they'll be able to assist in the investigation. But a social worker in that situation as the primary contact is just a go-between between the victim and law enforcement, and that's never a good idea. Just like pretty much everything else that comes out of the left. Okay, let's get you out of here with something I found amusing and then infuriating. First, take a look at this. As first pitches go, how does that compare to this one? Oh, now, just for giggles, take a look at this one. Now, I'm not going to make the obvious comparison of Democrat, Republican. That's too easy. That was a difference between alpha and beta males. Anyway, did you notice Fauci wearing a mask while he was on the mound? No one around him, social distancing in full effect. Now take a look at this. I am so tired of this mask nonsense. This guy is on video saying that masks don't work and only serve to make people feel better. And we've gone over the science that tells us that masks offer minimal protection against spreading the virus. Yet here he is going full hypocrite. Never go full hypocrite. Anyway, folks, we are out of time. I will try to do better the next time. It was a lot more I wanted to get to, but we'll have to do it next week. But thanks for watching, and for our audio-only subscribers, thanks for listening. But before we go, I want to ask you to please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free. Or you can check us out and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, or any other popular podcast platform. And if you could, leave a review. You can also find us on the web at thelibertycast.net and therightway.site. And of course, we're on social media, Parler, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms. Now again, folks, thank you all for spending this time with us, whether watching or listening. And as usual, until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.